All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. For those of you who I don't know, my name's Lee Storo. I'm the Executive Director of the North Carolina AIDS Action Network. We started doing a series of Thursday morning webinars at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think it's been a really positive way for our movement to stay in touch with each other, to continue to grow skills, and to have conversations about the advocacy topics we all want to be working on, even when we can't be together and are not facing many of those challenges. Before I get into the bulk of the conversation today, I do want to make a couple quick announcements. For those of y'all joining us in North Carolina, do want to alert you about a piece of legislation that we've been monitoring and working against that is moving at the North Carolina General Assembly. There is a bill called House Bill 918 that passed the House of Representatives last year in 2019 and began moving this week in the Senate. House Bill 19 is a bill that we oppose that would face pretty stark restrictions on women and people who use drugs while pregnant. Pretty punitive restrictions, including potentially criminalization. As an organization focused on harm reduction and who really believes that we need to think about better ways to support people who use drugs, really feel like the provisions in this bill are incredibly problematic and challenging. I will drop a link into the chat once I finish my portion that's got more detailed information about that legislation, if folks would like to sort of take a deep dive into it. That bill passed the Senate last night and is going to be voted on in the House of Representatives at 1:30 this afternoon. In all honesty, it's pretty darn likely it will pass the House of Representatives. An amendment was made in the Senate that means that it has to go back to the House for concurrence. But we do think it is worth contacting your House member and asking them to vote no on concurrence. If that bill does pass the House, which we very much expect it will this afternoon, it will go to the governor, and we are going to work to generate messages into his office that request that he veto the bill. For those of y'all who don't follow North Carolina politics as closely as I do, there's a pretty positive chance the governor would veto the bill, and the Democrats do have the votes to sustain a veto in the House and Senate if that happens. So if anything else, part of the conversation right now is just raising up and making sure people know that there are better ways to support people who use drugs and to sort of stretch this out as long as we can. So high level, if you have the bandwidth and time today and wanted to contact your House member in the House and ask that they oppose House Bill 918 and vote no on concurrence, and did that before 1:30 p.m., that would be incredibly helpful. And then we will send, along with our slides and a follow-up email from this call later this afternoon, evening, an update to the group, letting folks know if it did make it to the governor's office. At that point, it would be helpful to have phone calls or emails going into the governor's office asking him to veto that piece of legislation. I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is certainly connected to our topic at hand. I think all of us know that sort of criminalizing various people is so intersectional, but any super fast questions or comments or clarifications I can provide about that. I know that was really high level, and we'll include some information again in the chat function.
Lee?
Yeah.
Lee, I have a question. If it goes to the governor and he vetoes it, it's done with, or can it go back to the House and the Senate?
No, so if the governor vetoes the bill, it will go back to the House and the Senate, and they can override the bill. The good news is that the margins on the initial votes meant that there are not the votes to override the governor. So if everyone voted the same way they did in the initial votes, it would not pass. But we're also about to be at the end of session. There may be a chance that it just doesn't get dealt with. Like, there's a lot of possibilities ahead. So really, any advocacy work calling out how bad and problematic this bill is a good thing.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, and the last thing I'll mention is that we are going to have, we're continuing our weekly webinars next Thursday at 10 a.m. With a conversation about HIV tracing and surveillance. We will send out the link to register for that webinar as well in the follow-up email that'll come out later this afternoon, early evening. So with that, I want to pass things off to my colleague, Matt Martin, to introduce our topic at hand and speakers for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. And thanks everybody who joined us this morning. We're really excited for this conversation. I know I recognize a lot of names and faces from folks who were able to attend HIV Speaks on Jones Street 2 weeks ago at this point. It seems like it was just yesterday, but it was 2 weeks ago. And Jose joined us that morning for our opening session to talk about the work that the Durham Beyond Policing Coalition is doing in Durham around police brutality and defunding the police and working towards an abolitionist mindset here in the state of North Carolina. So we had really great reception with that conversation, and we want to continue that conversation moving because we know that there's no way to end the HIV epidemic if we don't address these barriers that we're facing in our society, especially when it comes to the epidemic of white supremacy and anti-Black racism and just
91969.
Had a little interference there. Yeah, so we just wanted to continue this conversation, and we're really excited to have Jose and Danielle talk a little bit more. So Jose, the floor is yours. I think that we will probably just let y'all go until you are finished and then open the floor up for questions once y'all's presentation portion is done, if that works for y'all. But the floor is yours.
Good morning, y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and share some slides. Let's see if this works. Can y'all see this? Can I get a thumbs up? Yes, sweet. Technology. So good morning. It's another beautiful day in North Carolina for Abolition. I'm excited to be joining y'all this morning with my co-conspirator and advisor, supervisor, so many different roles that we've shared, Dr. Danielle Purifoy, who's on the line with me today. We're both members of the Durham Beyond Policing Coalition. And as Matt said, a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done here in Durham to take some steps towards keeping our community safe and rethinking what safety means for us. Danielle, if you wanted to introduce yourself. I don't know if you can unmute.
Thanks, Jose. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Purifoy. I am, just like Jose said, I'm one of the organizers with Durham Beyond Policing. And Jose and I go back a few years now. We've been working together through various formations of Durham Beyond Policing. And it's really exciting I'm really excited to be here and to be learning more about some of the work that y'all are doing in the intersections. I mean, I think some of these things are clearer to me, but it's, some of the intersections are obvious, but I'm really excited to learn, to share with you, and also to learn a lot about what y'all are up to, because we want to, these are things that'll be important for our messaging and our considerations as well as a coalition. Just really appreciate the invitation, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Danielle. And so this is a particularly important topic for me as somebody who is PAWS and who learned what abolition is essentially the same year that I seroconverted. These things happen somewhat just by coincidence that this, Black Lives Matter was happening while I was in college. And this was also the time when I seroconverted. And so these things have always felt connected for me. And it's important for me to kind of combine these things. So I wanted to start with where a practice that we often do in abolitionist spaces, which is naming people in our movement who we have lost in the struggle or who are no longer with us physically in the struggle. I know that this is also something that was common in ACT UP in the earlier years as well, of naming our loved ones, right? So I want to encourage y'all to use the chat feature and name loved ones who you've lost during this moment, or the names of people who we've lost at the hands of police brutality. And while y'all are doing that, want to name some folks here in Durham that we honor with our work in Durham Beyond Policing. And those are Nisi Fennell, Jose Ocampo, Jesus Huerta, Kenneth Bailey Jr., and I see some folks adding some more. Frank Clark, Tony McDade, yes, and then nationally, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, Ahmed Arbery. We bring these names into this space and want to honor them and encourage y'all to continue to name these folks, because this is why we do this work, right, of learning how to keep each other safe and protecting each other. And also wanted to just unabashedly state that Black Lives Matter, las vidas negras importan. It's always incredible to me how difficult sometimes it is just to state that phrase for some folks. So just want to state that unapologetically, Black Lives Matter. And wanted to share a little bit about what we had kind of planned for our time, right? Just give a little bit of a 101 on abolition and ending the epidemic, talk about Durham Beyond Policing as like a case study for some of this work, and then a few lessons learned for organizing around this topic. So I really wanted to encourage y'all to, if you haven't seen it, to learn from some of our movement elders who recently released a really excellent webinar and 101 on what abolition is. This is currently exists online on YouTube via Haymarket Books, and it's called On the Road with Abolition, Assessing Our Steps Along the Way. And it gives a really comprehensive picture of what people mean when they say abolition, what people mean when they say defunding the police. And definitely encourage y'all to check it out. It's 2 hours, but wanted to just pull one definition that they bring there, which is from critical resistance. This is a formation that was founded in Los Angeles, but is national, and in part in collaboration with people who are working in the HIV/AIDS movement. Kenyon Farrow, who many of y'all might know as the founder of and executive editor of The Body, was a member of Critical Resistance in its earlier years. And there have been many folks who have been working at this intersection as well. And when we're talking about abolition, we want to be clear that we're talking about challenging and interrupting the prison industrial complex. So what is that? What is the PIC? And so for critical resistance, they say that the PIC is a way of describing how government and industry use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. This is also going to be very important because I hear that the next webinar next week will be diving into some of those issues around surveillance as well. So very excited and thinking about this in collaboration. So if that's what the prison industrial complex is, what abolition of that is a vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. So that's what we're doing, right? We want to create some lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. And from that perspective, abolition is both a tool. It's something that we can use, right, in our movement spaces, and it's also a goal, right? It's something that can help us do our work, and it is the work itself. So that's abolition, right? And we'll keep unpacking that a little bit more, but wanted to throw it back as far as how I understand ending the epidemic and really play this video that I imagine many of y'all have encountered before from Vito Russo, and just play this very briefly. It's gonna be some 2 minutes. Let me see if y'all can hear this.
Here together today. We're here because it is happening to us, and we do give a shit. And if there were more of us and less of them, wouldn't be what it is at this moment in history. It's more than just a disease, which ignorant people have turned into an excuse to exercise the bigotry they have always felt. It is more than a horror story exploited by the tabloids. AIDS is really a test of us as a people. When future generations ask what we did in this crisis, we're gonna have to tell them that we were out here today. And we have to leave a legacy to those generations of people who will come after us. Someday the AIDS crisis will be over. Remember that. Right on. When that day comes, when that day has come and gone, there will be people alive on this earth, gay people and straight people, men and women, black and white, who will hear the story that once there was a terrible disease in this country and all over the world, and that a brave group of people stood up and fought, and in some cases gave their lives so that other people might live and be free. So I'm proud to be with my friends today and the people I love, because I think you're all heroes, and I'm glad to be part of this fight. To borrow a phrase from Michael Callan's song, all we have is love right now. What we don't have is time.
Abomination organizing in the epidemic in North Carolina.
They're so busy putting out fires and taking care of people on respirators that they don't have the time to take care of all the sick people. We're so busy putting out fires right now that we don't have the time to talk to each other and strategize and plan for the next wave and the next day and the next month and the next week and the next year. And we're gonna have to find the time to do that in the next few months. We have to commit ourselves to doing that. And then after we kick the shit out of this disease, we're all gonna be alive to kick the shit out of this system so that this never happens again.
So I'd love to bring that up because abolition is one of those ways of finding the time, right? To figure out how we can actually beat this system and take care of each other. And that now I know that my own ability to live as I am in this undetectable way, as it's called, is thanks in part to the work that NCAN has done, so that when I finally lived in North Carolina, I would be able to benefit from the work that y'all have put in. This is all part of being able to protect each other and love each other. And so I want to thank y'all, name that legacy that we're working in, and say that part of how we are even able now to talk about ending the epidemic, for me, from my perspective, is thanks to this work at being able to challenge the larger system. And so to describe abolition and ending the epidemic a little bit more jointly, here's, playing a little bit with, if we're going to entertain binaries, what is abolition and what is it not, right? So there's a lot of mixed media around what abolition is and what ending the epidemic is, right? And so both of these come together in at least three certain ways, right? So abolition and ending the epidemic are lifelong, right? They're not just one event. It's not just as soon as we get everybody to reach an undetectable viral load once that event is past. Epidemic. It's not just when we've defunded the police that we're able to achieve abolition. We're actually talking about reimagining our lives, right? It's also about presence, right? A lot of times abolition can be connected to protests and as something that is mostly focused on saying that we don't have something. But from my perspective, it's all we do have. And what we're saying that we do have is the skills and the resources and the love to actually protect and love one another, right? To keep each other healthy and safe. And this is the same thing about ending the epidemic. I think many of us on this call might have heard folks who say, you know, we want to eliminate HIV, right? What does that mean when we're talking about that phrasing, right? For those folks who can't achieve an undetectable viral load, when we don't have a cure, how dare us talk about, you know, eliminating the epidemic when we're actually should be talking about changing systems, right? That prevent epidemics from ever happening, right? So it's about presence, you know, naming what we have here. And it's also about joy and pleasure, right? This is a movement rooted in joy, right? I have not been to a single protest in Durham that has not ended in a dance party. And if you haven't joined one, like definitely come out to the next one. There's an electric slide, a two-step for anybody, right? You can shimmy your way into the movement, and that is a perfect way of being able to learn more about what abolition is. And the ending the epidemic is also about joy and pleasure, right? We can't forget sex. You know, Dennis de Leon at the Latino Commission on AIDS, my favorite quote from him is, "Don't forget sex," right? We can't forget sex in our movement, and that this is actually a movement rooted in joy and pleasure. And wanted to put this on the table as well, to kind of start thinking about some of these steps, right? So we need public health to end the epidemic, right? We need this kind of work to be able to reach the right people in the right places at the right time. But policing hurts public health. And that's a quote from the American Public Health Association, actually. They say this in a press release that they put out in 2018, actually, from the whole association, which is that policing hurts public health. And so if we follow this, right, that public health is necessary to ending the epidemic, and that policing hurts public health, then that means that we need to change how we are understanding policing in our society and why it's occurring. And so police abolition becomes a strategy for public health, right? And vice versa, right? That public health can encourage abolition, and that abolition can encourage and promote public health as well. And so all of this comes down to what we mean when we say things like safety. And so I wanna give you all an opportunity to give us some feedback as well, and share some of your thoughts around what safety means to y'all. And so if you haven't used this tool before, it's called Mentimeter. And so this is a little poll, right? And I wanted to ask y'all to go to menti.com on your phone or in a different browser, enter the code you see, 512605, and tell us, what does safety mean to you? And I'll give you all a few seconds to submit some things on there. Okay. Community, education. Looks like community's been coming in a couple times. Yes. Calm, health, protection, love. Yes, loving these responses. Keep on coming, keep on coming. Snuggles with my kid. Oh my goodness. Yes. So important. Thinking about intimacy and family, right? Yes, all of these things are part of what safety means. And asking this question is how it is that we started to form this coalition that is called Durham Beyond Policing. We started to ask community members here in Durham, what does safety mean to you? And this was a question that was posed by so many organizers. And after years of people giving responses that weren't the police, some organizations came together to form a coalition. And Danielle is going to talk a little bit more about that coalition and some of that story now. So I can pull up the slides, Danielle. Thank you all. Continue to submit your responses. And
Jose, do you want me to just share my screen again? Or do you want to pull up the slides?
Whatever is easier for you. I have.
That's perfect. And I'll just, because I've been having some issues with my Zoom. Okay, Jose, that was amazing. Thank you for setting us up in the context for this conversation. I actually hadn't seen that video by Vito Russo. And yeah, it's really beautiful and really resonant with so many of the conversations that we've been having at Durham Beyond Policing. So I'm gonna just dive in and talk a little bit about what this coalition is, how it came about. So Durham Beyond Policing came about in, I guess 2015, 2016, around that time, when, and it was precipitated there. I mean, I guess to be clear, right? Like there have been policing abolitionist groups in North Carolina and particularly in Durham for a while. So there are formations like Spirit House, North Carolina, more recently Black Youth Project 100, Southerners on New Ground, have all taken up bits and pieces of abolition, of policing in the prison industrial complex. But those formations really came together along with Jewish Voices for Peace and several other formations, All of Us or None, came together to really form what became Durham Beyond Policing when the city of Durham was proposing spending first $81 million and then $71 million to build the new Durham Police headquarters, which is now fully built on East Main Street. And also had the nerve to build it across the street from a public housing community that they'd neglected for a long time. And we've seen, right, the fallout of that neglect with the devastation in McDougal Terrace earlier this year, just in January, with the evacuations and the health scares and the deaths of children that they've said are not linked to carbon monoxide that was leaking in those apartments. But we certainly know that the conditions were not healthy for anyone, right? Much less young children. So we had really taken on initially a kind of invest, divest approach. So we wanted to divest from policing and prisons and to reinvest our city's resources into supporting the health and well-being of Black and Brown communities, which, as we know, right, bottom-up work means that if you help folks who are the most targeted and most harmed by our current systems, right, then you help everyone ultimately. And so a lot of our conversations around police abolition have surrounded, for that reason, around our budget, right? Around how we utilize our resources. So Durham Beyond Policing has been really involved over the last maybe 3 to 4 city budget cycles in really scrutinizing how we define public safety and how our public dollars, which are sorely needed in so many arenas of our lives, are systemically, right, just and like routinely given to the police under the guise of keeping us safe. And so at the expense of, as you can see, you know, the wages of city workers, right, which, you know, they fought for a long time to get full-time city workers to $15 an hour. We just got $15 an hour for part-time city workers, and you know, those are important gains, but very limited when you consider, right, the amount of resources that go to the police in Durham. So just to give you a sense, the police budget is a line item within the larger public safety budget. Our public safety budget in Durham, in the city of Durham, is roughly, constitutes roughly half, right, of our general fund. And policing within that budget constitutes 60% of what we define of what is line item for public safety. So policing roughly makes up, we spend roughly 1/3 of our general fund, which is like really our money, the money that you are paying into our city's coffers on policing. And that means that we're not spending money on things like supporting affordable housing. We just took out, right, a like $90 million housing bond. Well, we wouldn't have to take on that kind of debt, right, if we were to shift around resources. And there are a lot of resources that that are we're in dire need of in multiple arenas of our lives: healthcare, our wages. There are, I mean, everything from, you know, we saw with McDougall Terrace, infrastructure issues with not only the carbon monoxide issues that were in the public housing, but also water and sanitation issues, which are things that are squarely under the purview, right, of the city. There was a lot of kicking the football back and forth and the blame on the Durham Housing Authority, which is a separate entity from the city, during when this happened with McDougall Terrace. But right, the clarity that we had is that all of these, you know, the people who are living in McDougall Terrace, the people who are city workers, are impacted by all of the systems that that make up the place that we live, right? And so it doesn't matter, right, whether it's the housing authority that's responsible for some service or the county, is that all of these systems are actively, right, invested, all of them are invested in policing, surveillance, and incarceration, and all of them have divested from really the systems that actually keep us safe. So I think you can go to the next slide, Jose. Okay, so, and it turns out that there are a number of models of what we think of as community safety and wellness, just existing within Durham, but we have, you know, as our coalition, done a good amount of research about other alternative systems of public safety across the country. But just to give you a sense, Spirit House, North Carolina, which has been around since the early 2000s, and perhaps in another formation even before then, has been doing harm-free zone trainings in Durham for years now. And what that training is about how we intervene and build relationships within our own neighborhoods and communities, so that when conflict arises, right, when there is danger, right, then we don't immediately have to seek out the police. How do we intervene ourselves, right? How do we keep ourselves safe? What are the kind of systems that we put in place in our communities to prevent, right, danger from occurring? And then when danger happens, what are other interventions that we can practice besides calling on the police? In connection to that, Durham Beyond Policing came up with a kind of template for a complete, right, abolition of current neighborhood watch, and we're calling it Good Looking Out. And it really is, right, like a kind of hyper-local, right, thinking about and a reframing of, you know, what does it mean to decide to not surveil your neighbors, right? What does it mean to not hop on your neighborhood listserv and, you know, report out people who you think of as suspicious walking through your neighborhood, and instead actually interact with, right? Meet people and connect with the people who are around you, and to actually build systems of mutual aid for people who need things, right? For people who need support. I live in a neighborhood right now that has been, you know, devastated in many ways by the gentrification and displacement forces in the city. And one of the things that has been incredible about the neighborhood is that the listserv is already taking up some practices of good looking out. Some of those folks have already been through harm-free zone training. And what they do is they squash, right? Like any and all of that kind of surveillance and policing, right? Private, basically deputized policing of people in communities, and really have developed various systems of mutual aid even before COVID-19 to support folks in community who may be out of housing, who may need work and odd jobs and those sorts of things. So that's a kind of other model. I won't go through all of these, but one of the models that we have looked at pretty extensively outside of North Carolina is Cahoots. It's out of Eugene, Oregon. It's crisis assistance, helping out on the street. You can see that in the middle of the screen there. And that formation, it's actually a mobile public health unit. It's sort of like if you were to call a hotline to get, if someone was having a mental health crisis, if someone needed conflict mediation, if someone there was some sort of danger and you needed intervention, instead of calling the cops, you could call health professionals, people who are trained in de-escalation, people who are trained in mediation, right? Medics, right? You can call all of them all at once, and they come out in teams to intervene when there's danger or harm that is occurring or about to occur. And that formation existed, Cahoots came out of the White Bird Clinic, which is a free healthcare clinic that formed in the 1970s. And so there's the bottom line here is there's a really long legacy of building community safety systems that don't have nothing to do with the police, and that actually are a really active part of keeping us safe. One of the things I want to say before we go to the next slide is that, we have, one of the things, and I think this is really resonant with our conversation today and with, and some of the ideas around safety, wellness, and care, right, that y'all are invested in, is that we have talked a lot about and had a serious emphasis on our budget resources, but and redistribution, which are super important. And one of the core pieces of this work, right, is really a structural reorientation, right, and a reframing of what safety is, right, and having to tell a completely different story, right, and communally, right, like tell a completely different story of what safety is and what it is not, and how we can build safety together, and what that actually means, right, and the hard work of what it actually means when the rubber hits the road. And those are conversations that have come right to the fore for us during COVID-19, which are of course questions that have been in the forefront for a very long time throughout the HIV/AIDS pandemic and now epidemic here in the US. So yeah, just to point that out, that yeah, these things are really intimately connected, and so it's important for us to move beyond, very clear that it's important for us to move beyond conversations of just budgets and monetary redistribution. Yeah, so this slide is just a little bit dated, but essentially our latest fight with the city council over the budget had to do with the routine increase of the police budget. The police got a 5% raise this year, not necessarily by salary, but just in their overall budget. Again, it represents about a third of the general fund. And they passed that after, we sent in over 4,000 public comments opposing this, and they passed it anyway. And what that meant actually is that city workers who had fought for a number of years to get a restructured system for pay, scheduled pay increases, did not get those pay increases funded this year. There are layoffs that are expected. I think, part-time city workers are particularly vulnerable. And, the bottom line was that at a time where there was uprisings across the world against policing and efforts by peer cities, right, to defund the police, our city, which was well positioned, right, to make another decision, decided to reaffirm or ratify this increase to the police budget. So we are mad as hell about this. This is something that we're continuing to fight. This comes on the heels, by the way, of the city council's demonstration of the ways that they can lead. Last year, when we proposed a community safety and wellness task force to develop alternative systems to policing in Durham, we proposed that during last year's budget cycle, and we also pushed them to deny an increase to the police budget last year, which they passed. So last year, they actually, in the absence of, global uprisings, they made the right decision. And this year, they've made the wrong decision. So they've done some backsliding and backtracking. They did receive quite a bit of backlash for that decision last year, but it was the right decision. And one of the things that became clear to us is that the narrative around the nexus between an uptick, as happens every summer, right? It happened last summer, in shootings and violence, is this false narrative that that's actually tied to the presence or absence of police, right? And so there are these larger, again, getting to these larger narratives around public safety and what the police do and do not do in our communities is really going to be central for us moving forward if we are going to win. So there are some demands that we've had. We still have these demands: 100% defunding of the police budget. We want to reallocate their money towards the community needs and rebuilding of these new safety systems. We asked for $200,000 to fully fund the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force just for the first year to do research. We asked for $7 million for coronavirus mutual aid relief fund. And then City Council did actually pass, I believe, a resolution around racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness as a public health concern. That's a lot of city councils pass these kinds of resolutions. That was a kind of low-hanging fruit thing. We have not actually seen a real radical, right, action that we are really pursuing and hoping for them to work on. The last thing that I'll say is that City Council, while, as they passed the budget, also allocated $1 million to some portion of what the outcomes are of the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. That is, one of the things that's been challenging about that is that what we want, right, is that the systems of safety that we want to build require the absence of the police, right? They require, right, a total shift in the way that our systems work. And so the systems that we're trying to build will fail if we do not actually dismantle the systems that are and it's not just policing, right? It's capitalism, it's racism, right? It's all these things that are tied to it that yeah, that really undermine, right? Like the kinds of public safety that we're looking for. So they threw us a crumb essentially, and it was very vague about, they were very vague about what that actually would look like. And just, I guess, lastly, just the objectives of the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, which has been ratified by City Council. We're still waiting on ratification by this, the County Commission and the School Board, because we also want cops out of schools. And we also want to ultimately, right, like defund the Sheriff's Department. That's another, that's another formation, right? We want to abolish policing in all of its forms, and we need to create systems of community safety for all of Durham. So we want to research and uplift existing community wellness and safety measures, and both in Durham and across the world, and then to propose new systems that we think will work best for Durham. And yes, no sheriff and no jails, like absolutely. So that is essentially what we're working on. There are of course deep ties with questions around, as Lee was talking about earlier, right? Like bills around criminalization, right? Narratives, right? It goes back to the kind of themes around narratives of criminality, bad people, right? Communities that deserve to be targeted and surveilled, right? And people who deserve to be locked in cages. And we need a radical, right, reframing and restructuring of those narratives to help us win. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking more about this.
All right, let me unmute. Thank you, Danielle, for walking us through some of that exciting DVP history. It's been an honor to really be able to take part in some of that work, and we're really trying to continue to expand our collaborations and like think through how this can be work that's done at the statewide level, right? We don't want to just focus it in Durham. We don't want to just focus it in the Triangle. These are conversations we want to have across the state, and NCAN has really been modeling how to be able to engage community partners from all the different areas of the state. So really appreciate that. And I want to bring it back to this slide right now that we have some of this context around Durham Beyond Policing, which is to remember that, right, public health is necessary to end the epidemic. If policing hurts public health, then police abolition is a strategy for public health and vice versa, right? And to really just nail that in for our work here today and moving forward. And wanted to also offer a few thoughts around just like the continuum of care, right? That many of us who work in HIV/AIDS like are familiar with. And this is from the North Carolina Linkage Plan released in 2018. And wanted to just point out that as an offering, the abolition, when we're talking about this as a strategy or a goal, the two like main sections of the continuum where we're going to really be seeing abolition like really taking part are going to be in testing and in recruitment and in engagement in services, right? Linkage to services, I think, is where we can start having broader conversations around public health and like what kind of services are available. But really when we're talking about testing and recruitment and adherence, that's where we're going to really be able to understand why it is that people are, as it said, falling out of care. Because we know that they're not actually falling out of care, but systematically getting excluded from care and prevention. And so abolition is one of those ways of being able to understand that picture and the pathways for how people can be able to access or not access testing and services. Also wanted to highlight, I had mentioned this last time as well, North Carolina has 100 counties. Since in 2014, the state made a decision to try to link prevention and care in the North Carolina healthcare system, right? And in that effort, they started creating these care and prevention regions, right? That are how the Department of Health organizes healthcare services across the state. For me, it was always kind of confusing. Why was prevention and care not linked from the beginning? But, it took a lot of advocacy, right, from NCAN and from other regional partners to be able to really understand that prevention is actually a key piece to being able to end the epidemic, right? So much of the funding for several years was focused on care and not actually preventing people from having to engage in services. So wanted to highlight these care and prevention regions to encourage us to be thinking about which region we're in, right? And to also think about what's happening in our region. So I had a different slide where I had kind of overlaid this a little bit, but I lost that slide deck. But I had shared this on our virtual advocacy day. And this is a map of where different protests have emerged since the start of June, right? Related to the Black Lives Matter movement, related to defending Breonna Taylor's life and legacy, defending Ahmaud Arbery's life and legacy here in North Carolina. So this is just the last month, right? And we can see that across all of these different regions that we see here, and every single one of these regions, I'm pointing on the screen as if you can see me, and every one of these different regions, protests have happened, right? And it's not just something that's confined to a metropolitan area. Across the rural areas of North Carolina as well, we've seen folks raising their voice and lifting them up. You can't really see the outline of North Carolina, but you can almost detect it just from the amount of protests that have gone across the state. And I'll share this slide with Matt to share with y'all so y'all can have this as well. I also mentioned this on our virtual advocacy day that as of June 12th, there was a call from White Coats for Black Lives, started at UW, that at the University of Washington, where over 1,200 medical professionals signed on to a letter saying that protests actually promote public health. And in that document, they made stated three facts, right? That white supremacy is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19, staying at home and social distancing, and public masking are effective at minimizing the spread of COVID-19. And that public masking piece was like was a key component of what they were trying to say, right? That you can be in public if you're doing it in a safe and harm reductionist kind of way, right? And also that protests against systemic racism, right, which fosters the disproportionate burden of COVID-19 on Black communities, also perpetuates police violence. And so these must be supported, right? That these protests must be supported. So over 1,200 physician's assistants, medical doctors signed on to this, and over 7,000 medical trainees. And to close, just wanted to offer three provocations, three kind of intersections that I think are useful. And these are that, and for me, speaking personally, I could really see this safety and wellness task force model as being something that we can advocate for at the city and county level across the state, right? When people ask us, what are you going to be replacing the police with? Our response is a community-led safety and wellness task force, right? Like something that can be funding these alternatives to policing, right? And so this is one model that we're offering to other folks when they're looking for how to respond to that question that comes up so often. And then just to repeat kind of the last slide, to encourage us to protect and support social justice and protest, whatever that looks like in our different spaces, and to remember that we keep us safe, right? And that prevention and care is something that we can do, right? Regardless of funding, regardless of where we're located, it's something that we have the capacity within ourselves to do. And just wanted to close with a quote from Dr. Stephen Thrasher, who's been doing a lot of work around HIV criminalization, and specifically focused around Georgia. And he's got a book coming out next year called The Viral Underclass. And he is has done a lot of work around the intersection of Black Lives Matter and the HIV/AIDS movement. And he says that an uprising comes from the viral underclass, and the Black Lives Matter movement could be the vaccine that the country needs, right? So how can we really be thinking about the work that we're doing as offering that healing and that care that we need in this moment? And so this is from an article published in Slate that I highly encourage you all to check out. And if you have thoughts, feel free to email me or Danielle, and we can talk about them some more, because I want to talk to people about them some more. But want to encourage y'all to please, if you can, if you're able, there's so many fundraisers these days, but to please support Durham Beyond Policing if you're able to. That's our giving link. We've been doing a lot of this work, funded and unfunded in various ways for the last few years, and are finally trying to do this in a more intentional and long-term way with some more money. So definitely want to encourage y'all to donate. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. There's my work email, there's Danielle's email. You can find Durham Beyond Policing at durhambeyondpolicing.org, where you can read the full Health and Safety Task Force document. And I think that's all I have there.
Awesome. So yeah, I know we are right at the 11 o'clock mark, so I know some folks might have to hop off. Jose, we do have a question in the chat box from someone asking, is there a way for Durham residents to get involved directly? Should they just contact either you or Danielle for more information as to how to get involved directly?
That's a great question. Whoever asked that, love it. Lily, thank you, Lily. So we have an open Durham Beyond Policing meeting this Saturday. It will be virtual, and it is from 2 to 4, I believe, right, Danielle? Yeah. I'll copy this into the chat. So we have interest meeting from 2 to 4 p.m. I'll try to find, I can send you the link to register after, so if you can pass it on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So and anything that y'all would like to pass on, we typically send a follow-up a little bit later. So, so like I said, I know we are close to the 11 o'clock mark. We really appreciate everyone who is able to join. If y'all are comfortable, I'll share your emails in the email that we send out later, so that if folks want to follow up with more questions, they're able to do that. We will be sending out additional information in our follow-up email, including some stuff around the House bill that we are trying to oppose, House Bill 918, and just some follow-up steps with this. But just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for this really crucial conversation. I'm really excited that we continue to have these conversations, and we'll hopefully keep them moving forward. So thank you to Jose and Danielle and all the work that y'all are doing. And with that, I think we will call it a day. So thank y'all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Look forward to seeing y'all all back next Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. And I see your question, Max. I'll get your email and follow up.